Welcome, everyone. Another live event from NestSwitch. And today we have our special guest, Dr. Carvers, Mustafa Carvers from Monte Carlo Plus. And of course, my partner, Sean Mahoney. Well, thank you, everyone, to come back and join us again. Today, we're going to talk about something very special. It might not be everyone, talk about cyber risk governance that we have been talked about for quite some time, but we're going into a little direction which we have talked about from NIST 8286 publication perspective, how to integrating cybersecurity and enterprise risk management. So Dr. Carvers today is very generous. Not only that, he's going to share his knowledge about value at risk coming from enterprise risk management, but also that he's willing to have his basically intellectual property and share it into Unity risk indicator. A lot of people that I talk to and have seen the risk indicator that we have put together, and I talked to you about it, releasing it next year in the open source. So this is going to be continue to be the plan, and we are very excited to have cyber VaR, which is cyber value at risk, going to be adding into Unity. So look forward to hear from your comment, and we'll talk more about it in our future live event as well. But without further ado, I'm going to let Sean to introduce Mustafa, and then let Mustafa to start teaching us what is value at risk. Thank you. Oh, Sean, we couldn't hear you.
And Mustafa is joining us today. Mustafa is currently the managing partner of Monte Carlo Plus. He is also the author of the CISI workbook, Risk and Financial Services, with the Chartered Institute for Securities and Investment. Mustafa, thank you for joining us today and welcome.
Thank you, Sean. Thank you, Stanley.
It's recently value at risk often is not something that a lot of people are in conversation about. It's a fairly unique area of looking at risk, many times at CFOs, and it tends to be in the financial services market. But the topic has been coming up within the cyberspace and enterprise risk management more recently, and was recently addressed as a deficiency in the SEC cybersecurity rules. That they really didn't address organizations addressing value at risk from a cyber aspect for themselves. But could you just give everybody here who's not well versed in the topic of value at risk, what does it mean?
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining. Metric called VaR, value at risk, is a metric which has been used mainly in financial services. But in a nutshell, it represents a potential loss with a probability attached to it over a certain confidence, over a certain time period. So basically, I'll give you an example. For any firm, a VaR of 5 million means, for example, a firm could be losing over 1 month or a year, depending on which we're talking about. VaR, one month versus 1 year. But a VaR of one month VaR of 5 million means the firm could lose potentially up to 5 million. It doesn't mean it's going to lose, but there's also a probability attached to it, saying a VaR of 5 million at 99.5 confidence level, i.e., they are certain that the loss cannot be larger than 5 million over that 1 month horizon. And there's only still 0.5% chance, i.e., 1 minus 200. So 1 by 200 is actually our probability that there is still a chance that the loss could be above 5 million. So in a nutshell, it's one single metric to talk to a CEO about a financial consequence of a loss. The same thing with cyber. So big cyber events happen all the time. But if you want to, as a CISO, Chief Investment Security Officer, if you want to say, how risky your current profile is versus a year ago, 6 months ago, you could say my cyber value at risk, my cyber potential loss from cyber event, one single or from all events, is 5 million over 1 month horizon. This, in a way, gives a metric, a dollar value to say, oh, 5 million. So if you got a revenue of 100 million, 5 million represents something. It's like a 5% of my revenue over 1 month horizon. So in that sense, it is a very nice metric and as well as a unique way of communicating the same language. So basically, we all talk about at dollar numbers rather than, oh, my risk is quite high because I've got a lot of DDoS attacks and there's a lot of other cyber issues. Suddenly, it's high, but the bot will say how high, and that the number must be in the dollar term.
Yes, and this is why we started the initiative, going into the data visualization, try to make things simple, right? To, use picture to paint the story. And now basically we're bringing in the numbers where the business executive can start the communications or at least to monitor, and what we, continue to talk about is measure and monitoring the progress, because we know this is a journey in cybersecurity, and we have been in this journey for quite some time, and of course it keep evolving, and now it makes it more complex because of the GRC issues. One of the topic we keep talking about is contextual correlations, but at the same time, for the business executive, how did they measure it? I'm looking at the Investopedia, and talking about value at risk is a way to quantify the risk of potential losses for a firm or an investment. So we know that there's a lot of investment went into cybersecurity, IT, not only the tools, but the people. And we believe the process is somewhat outdated because now, there are new technology like yours to evaluate and quantifying the dollar amount so we can keep track from a very simple, visualization perspective, but related to the company's financial objective. And of course, one of the way that we keep talking about, from an ERM perspective, what cyber VaR does from your perspective is looking from the top down. And we would be talking about how do we evaluate from the bottom up, the IT side, the cybersecurity, because a lot of company already invested a lot of money and billions of dollars around the world into this, fundamental building blocks. But at the same time, for us, we need to make it visualize, make it easier to communicate, and then to continue to collaborate. So
Mhm.
I know that, Mustafa, that you spend quite a bit of time and try to paint that picture for the audience, coming from the enterprise risk management. And do you mind to, go from the bottom up from this perspective, looking at the Monte Carlo analysis, because this is one of the topic that people ask me. I have no idea what you, how to look at it, right? It's like, why Monte Carlo analysis? And yes, it is down to, it's very technical part, and but at the same time I think it's critical for people to understand why this particular model, why
Mhm.
does it help to project the potential financial loss, the value at risk. So I think that from that fundamental of the modeling, we can go backwards to go upwards, and and then look at it from both sides to wrap up this webinar.
Sure. I mean, you're spot on, Stanley. Um, we need to look at this from both bottom up as well as top down. I'm not sure whether you can see my slides.
Yep.
I'm sharing.
Let me adding.
So I'm not
Uh-uh.
sure whether.
Well,
Yeah,
I'll add it in for a second.
yeah.
Yeah. So why don't you please continue?
So basically, well, we need to look at risk from bottom up as well as top down. And top down often has been the scenario analysis as well as like larger strategy and the components breaking down. But I want to share here more from bottom up because people can relate to that very easily, because we'll talk about risk registers, cyber risk. I'll give you an example of risk registers here. And basically what we will do, hopefully it will be clear to people listening in, how how to improve cyber risk triage, i.e. decision making, i.e. if you are confronted, like in emergency room, if you're confronted with a cyber attack or cyber risk, are you going to say this is non-life threatening, or it's life threatening? Basically, how are you going to prioritize your risks and threats? So the second thing we are going to talk is what are the metrics of risk-based decision making, and there are qualitative and quantitative. And quantitative are value at risk as an example, but there will be different ones as well. But initially, let's look at the financial monetary aspects of cyber risk, and basically how to expand risk management beyond cyber event losses with additional decision making metrics is going to be next up. And also, as I said, risk register and quantification to do the prioritization and cost minimization, and meaning optimize your risk profile, because you've got a certain budget. You don't have a full budget. If you've got a company with 100 million revenue, you don't have 100 million to spend. So if you've got a limited revenue, so a limited investment on your cyber.
Yeah, and
So,
you're right on. And again, going back into the NIST 8286, it's talking about risk register, risk profile, and then risk quantifications. And of course, this is the part that we will elaborate as well, why we need to look at it from the bottom up, from the risk register perspective. What are the devices? What are the databases? And then so on and so forth. But it's not going to be on this live event. It's going to be on next one. So I'm going to challenge you a little bit. We will go into those topic, which is you already have this deck prepared, but why Monte Carlo? Why
oh,
this modeling, right? And then
well,
I'm going to go back into what you talked about earlier. Yes.
now, why Monte Carlo? Monte Carlo as a methodology has been there for some time for firms to understand their risk profiles. And has been implied. Well, it has been applied to financial services firms, as you say, Stanley. But at the same time, the application is unique, so it doesn't matter. But what's happening in the Monte Carlo is, and why it's Monte Carlo, not some sort of a one-sided model, is actually risk has two dimensions. And the two dimensions can be only modeled in a Monte Carlo. What are the two dimensions? I'm sure sort of you think of risk as risk, like a cyber event, but or some sort of like or someone attacking my systems. But this risk has two elements. Someone attacking my systems has two elements. The first element is the likelihood of someone attacking and making a successful entry to my business and my systems, and i.e. being able to steal something and being able to inflict a financial loss. So the probability and the likelihood of someone's successfully attacking and gaining value is sort of in that sense one side of the risk, i.e. likelihood or probability of occurrence, a successful occurrence. But then second element of any risk is the so given that this cyber event occurred now, what does it mean financially? What is the impact? That itself is not a constant thing, because let's say data breach. A large company will lose a large number of data. If a small company with smaller data base on their system will lose smaller amounts. So therefore, it's not a fixed number. So basically, also the probability of successful penetration from an outsider will depend on the current risk and sort of control environment. So in that sense, again, that depends on how strong the risks, so how strong the mitigations are.
Yeah, so and this is go back into the decision makers. They simply looking at those two components of it and to evaluate whether I should spend any money on this particular project, because the business objective sometimes that I know when my team asks me for budget, they say, hey, why are you asking it, right? And yeah, Sean is laughing because I ask
Yes.
that question all the time. Well, justify it for me. Show me why do I need to spend the money? And now it's actually another way to basically evaluating where I'm going to spend the money. And then of course, the why Monte Carlo plus, I'm not an expert, but again, according to what I've read, is basically this metric is computed by three ways: the historical, variance, covariance, and the Monte Carlo method. So I don't know what that means, but
Oh,
the only thing I understand is about the historical part, because this is the part that
yes.
related from the IT and cybersecurity that I can explain is, look, you know, a lot of time that we work with our clients, the business executive, one of the questions they ask me quietly in a private room is, well, I don't know how my IT is doing. I don't know how my cybersecurity is doing. It's like, yeah, they asked me money, I spent it, and then I don't know how to measure it. I don't know how to monitor it. And that's why I bring up the importance about why Monte Carlo methodology, right? And of course, this is the part that I'm going to bring back into the start of the deck, Mustafa, thank you for sharing that. And to go back into why we need to talk about this subject and how does it relate it to cyber risk
Yes.
governance. And part of it is just to show the business executives, hey, look, you know what, it is a very simple way to evaluate your value at risk and what are you spending on, in terms of of course they know what they're spending on is the IT, cybersecurity, GRC, governance, risk, compliance, but now they have a way to monitoring it, measure and monitoring it, and look at the risk profiles and then make those two simple decision, or evaluations, I should say. What is the likelihood and what would be the financial impact? And
Yeah.
that makes it very compelling for the audience that I have talked to about the Unity Risk Indicator and how we plan to share it as an open source, and why we think it's important for universities or even junior college and use this type of modeling to teach the next generation of practitioners. And that's what our goal is: try to elevate connaissance. So again, I'm going to pass it back to you. I'm going to try to keep my mouth shut now.
No, great. And then, you're talking about the right things. Basically, you remember again coming back to Monte Carlo dimension or Monte Carlo method. So when we have risk in two dimensions, one is the likelihood dimension. And I have here an example: how people think of likelihood rating, like rare event. This is one definition, but it could be different definition as well. May occur. So, like a cyber event may occur in exceptional circumstances, i.e., less than 2% probability over 1 year horizon. So think of it, it's always over a certain horizon. So basically, and unlikely means could occur, but unlikely, i.e., 2 to 24% probability to occur over the next year horizon, or likely to occur once every 5 to 20 years. So you can think of a probability like in this buckets. Initially, it's a good way of starting, because you have no idea about the likelihoods, because it's because often you don't have enough historical data, and you are left with so-called risk control self-assessment, i.e., subjective assessment. And often, here's an example of how this RCSA, the risk control self-assessment, looks like. So there's a likelihood people attach to a risk. I'll come to risk registers. And there's also impact. So impact could be, has dimensions such as environmental, like financial, health and safety, and legislative compliance. And then people say, what's the impact in terms of like rating? Insignificant, minor, moderate, major. So insignificant mean in financial terms? Less than 10K for this organization. But depending on the size of organization, that will be maybe £1,000 only, or severe is more than 2 million. But so for smaller firms, it's maybe more than 200K. So basically, this is definitely depend on the firm size. But basically, if you think of these ratings, then a firm can come up with these sort of like risks, and those are the most commonly cyber risks I think you will find. So risk name, let's say on the left hand side, you've got backdoors, form jacking, crypto jacking, DDoS attacks, DNS attack, ransom attack, botnet software. Like in ransom attack, as you know, the definition that someone actually sort of puts some sort of a code on your systems and releases only if you pay them some money. I remember this. There's a university here in Germany. I'm based currently in Germany and I commute to UK. And this University of Essen-Duisburg is just next door. They were, I think 3 years ago, they had a ransom attack, but they didn't want to pay. It took 6 months, a year to build their own system. So basically, often it's better to pay. So that's other thing. But it's your risk appetite, isn't it? I mean, ransom attack, it's one of potential things that can happen. So, and how do they assess? Firms say inherent likelihood, i.e., inherent means without any controls in place, what's the gross likelihood? And they say, this is from the ratings we had up there, 1 to 5. They say, look, it is a 3. But given the controls in place, it's still 3. They say, okay, great. The controls are not effective enough, but what's inherent impact without controls? So, it's here, like it could be financial impact is like moderate between 100 and 500K in this case, but residual impact could be as little as between 10,000 and 100K. So basically, this is how a so-called RCSA, risk control assessment, looks like. And this is a risk register taken from an RCSA workshop or after a workshop has been done. This is a subjective one. Often you don't have enough data on that.
Yeah, and then actually you brought up a very good point, because what we've been advocating about data visualizations and now of course risk quantifications, that's the spectrum in part of inside cyber risk governance, right? As a governance, as a process. But a lot of time is the start of the communications, and the audience, our group's member that I talk to, have the privilege to talk to one-on-one or in our private roundtable. So far we have a majority agree in using data visualization, and that's why we put it together. Basically, we continue to leverage this type of data visualizations. But but my point is why we need to emphasize on the data visualization to just make the communication easier, right?
Absolutely. I mean, you didn't know how many ransom attacks you have and how many did you have last week, the year before. So visualization is extremely important. You need to understand all the sort of, I would say, likelihoods, sort of impacting parameters, and that comes from your visualization. Absolutely, spot on.
Yeah, and also that highlights into the university you talked about in Germany, and it happens across the world. Everywhere is happening with the data bridge. And shall I pay and shall I not pay? Of course, we don't advocate of paying, but the point of that is, if the executive doesn't have this visualization tools, they cannot easier to make this type of decision. So they tend to be, okay, you know what, it's not going to happen to me, nothing is going to happen, we're going to keep our fingers crossed, continue to be like that. So now that they have a tool, they can engage into the communication, they can engage into the collaboration, they can wait, okay, if we don't do this recommended by the IT and the infosec team or the CISO or the CIO, CTO, then this is potentially how much, not only the amount of money that they're going to lose, that or potentially losing, and the time. And that's the element, the time we don't even know, because nobody knows. And even though you have money to pay, but does it come back and help you to recover the system as you want it? And sometimes it's not as easy. So these are the things that now change the narrative, changing the cultural perspective. Now we have some point of reference into dollar amount, so they can start the communication. And we also sharing recently, sorry, one last point, we're also sharing now, yes, you want to pay the ransomware. Now Sean, what is that they call it? The triple ransomware attack or not?
Yeah, it's the triple threat because they
Triple
don't
threat. Thank
leave
you.
the network. They have your data. They hold it ransom. They come back in. The risk that Mustafa is showing here, back doors. They open those back doors. You may think you have them all closed, but when they're in your network, they'll open up those back doors to come back into your network.
Sorry, Mustafa, you had it. You were going to
Yeah,
say
no,
something.
absolutely. But basically, but the thing is, your risk registers are your starting point, right, for your analysis, for decision making, because you've got limited budget, you don't know which risk mitigation actions should be taken, and which ones are critical ones, and where how much should I invest in my preventive controls, i.e., the controls which lower my likelihood, and detective controls, i.e., the controls which lower my impact. Because again, risk has two dimensions. Okay.
Right. And that goes
So
back
basically,
into the risk register, traditional risk register. Lots of companies still using Excel spreadsheet to keep track, right? And that is, yes, the annual deck, and going back into the qualitative, the conventional approach, and looking at those data that they as a risk register. But there are a couple of things that we talked about. One is the contextual correlation, which is not there when you have a single spreadsheet to looking at that. It is very one-dimensional, and of course, it's not quantitative into the
you
dollar
need it's
amount,
a
right?
correlation between those, this risk as well. Exactly, these risks don't come uncorrelated. A botnet software attack is often comes with a DNS attack, for example, and there's a correlation given your firm's risk profile. There's an inherent correlation between those risks and scenarios.
Right. And that's part of the profiling. If you're just looking at the
Absolutely.
one dimension data, then you only get one side of the story. Unfortunately, now that the IT is not zero and ones anymore, because now we're adding the elements of the GRC. So that is part of, tied it into the cost efficiency, operational
Absolutely.
effectiveness. And the GRC now, of course, we've been talking about, pulling the more weight into how you inference how cybersecurity should be operating, or at least should be looking at from the objective point of view. And we try to break it down not just on the framework or regulatory, we break it down to controls, subcontrols, and the tools, what to do, what kind of tools to measuring the subcontrol to give us back the quantitative approach, and then now from the top down going into the qualitative control. I'm sorry, the qualitative and then the quantitative from the top down, from the financial perspective.
Yeah.
And of course, tied it back into why Monte Carlo? What is wrong with this
Yes.
traditional model at this point? People using that have been some time in using it. Why do we need to change?
Absolutely. So basically, it's the spot on. I mean, Stanley, the qualitative approach is actually, just looking at this level, and then saying, look, you know what? I multiply, my gross, so inherent likelihood, inherent impact, i.e., 3 times 3 is 9. And if I multiply by residual likelihood with residual impact, i.e., for the backdoors, it's 1 times 1 is 1. So basically, then they put this into this matrix, this this risk matrix, and you will see that qualitative approach is that actually people place like in this one, the likelihood and the consequence I impact as or the 2 dimensions, and then the risks are sort of put into this matrix as their risk, sort of risk management and presentation to board. But again, there's no information on how big risks are, because it's just high, medium, low. It's basically what it does. Here's the literature review of the a problem, and the whole problem with the qualitative assessment. It's not my review. I've taken this sort of from internet, just to be impartial. Basically, people say this qualitative assessment compresses ranges, creates illusion of communication to bit board, but actually, it neglects things like correlations. It collapses uncertainty because it's now the uncertainty risk is measured in 1 to 5 rather than in dollar terms, and you don't look even the potential, like how big the losses can be, and for that you need some sort of Monte Carlo model. And mathematically, you can't even add or multiply or aggregate risk. Like in our case, you've got the 7 risks we've shown. You can't add. Here again, going back to you can't add. Oh, you know what? My backdoors, form jacking, crypto jacking, DNS attacks. Oh, what's the so what's my aggregate risk profile of the firm? I can't. Basically, going back to this quantified approach, this in that sense is as as some people say, this can be worse than useless. In fact, it could be misleading and helping firms to misjudge their risk mitigation strategies. So in that sense, it's worse than useless. Maybe a very good way to describe this.
Yeah, and I like it about creates illusion of communication.
Yes, exactly. Yes, absolutely.
And that's the part from of course even though I am in this field for almost 30 years, and this is always where it starts to go off the tangent, go off the direction, and have the wrong expectations. And because once the project starts and once the budget approved, once the project starts, I don't think many executive or management want to keep looking over people's shoulder, because that's not the cultural to micromanage, right? But at the same time that, Sean, where is it? Where's the project? I'm concerning that, is it going to be done on time? Is it going to be done on budget? Are we getting the result we expecting? So this is why that, yes, you're right. It creates the illusion of communications. And now, based on what you said about the Monte Carlo, now based on these illusions of communication, right? And now we're going to look at the data. Go back
Yes.
into, as an executive, from the management perspective. Let's look at the data. And you mentioned a few example about backdoors. The type of threats that, using the IT language. The backdoor, the SQL injection. I mean, the security, and all those threats are real. They are not. We don't make them up, and we have a sample report of over 300 pages just to identify what type of potential threat and how we come in with the automated system to evaluate those threats and create the baseline. Now, I got a baseline now. I know what the deficiency from the configuration assessment from a 0-day exploitation perspective, from a pen test, or even sometimes that we're going into the application developments and look at the dynamic application security assessment perspective. I got all this data. Company in our members and our audience spend millions, billions of dollars into this. So I'm gonna, go one slide forward, and this is the kind of the journey talk about, and where your system, how we're looking at the ERM from risk quantifications, and go down a little bit deeper into looking at this control data sets and what are the risks. Can you walk us through this, please?
Yeah, I mean here, this example, like backdoors, will have certain controls in place. So basically, a firm which has these, let's say, 7 examples of offers, will not have uncontrolled environment. They will have implement various controls at level, such as there's maybe technological controls, there are process controls, there will be people controls. So basically, like 4I principle is itself a control. There will be a written procedure process. Often that's the next level of control. Then there's IT technology controls. So basically, all of these risks will have controls, written, procedural. It will be people controls, IT controls. It will be overall sort of governance controls, and mainly, and these controls then are sort of evaluated with control effectiveness. And often people, I mean, this one, I don't want to go too much in detail, but for all of the risks, there is, and also for the mitigations in place, there will be a control effectiveness score. Often, people even just make it very, mathematical. They say, oh, it's a score of 80, score of whatever. That's, it's too complex, in that sense, because garbage in, garbage out. So you have to make sure you don't you don't spend too much time on the wrong place. What you want is, of course, a very basic assessment on all the controls in place, and you are able to assess the controls. And based on this, you can actually say, you know what, based on this, my inherent likelihood is not, let's say 4 out of, but it's 3 or 1. So basically, it's actually, it is not as bad as without control. So basically, inherent means without control, and residual means with controls. This is again on likelihood and probability space as well as impact space. So in that sense, the conventional risk management in that sense is really to multiply inherent time, likelihood times inherent impact, and residual time, likelihood with residual impact. And this is what you have on as an outcome. Yeah, in this case, the residual risk rating from your profile is ransom attack is your biggest risk. But look at the next slide. If actually we do the same, if we use the same data, what does Monte Carlo method as a quantitative risk methodology tells us? So basically, now we are able to put a VaR amount, as I said, loss amount over, let's say here, over the 1 year horizon at at high confidence level. We are very confident that actually the loss can't be more than, in this case for botnet software, it can't be more than 5 million over 1 year horizon. But it could be more, but there's only tiny bit of probability, i.e. maybe 0.5% chance that actually the VaR number could be bigger. But in reality, we know that actually there's an envelope, because we use likelihoods and impacts, and both are using statistical models, and you get an envelope of values. So what? Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm glad that it's just that you're the genius behind these things. It's like, and a lot of times that going back, yes, and we understand that a lot of from the top-down approach, the business executive, they worry about the concern about the financial impact, right? That's the most
Yeah.
important. And now, you touch on part of the control data is on the governance control, the policies and procedures. And
Yes.
what I learned from our lawyer partners and talk about possible deniability or defensible evidence, right? So
Absolutely.
this
Absolutely.
is the part that actually, as an organization of NetSwitch, we try to break down this complexity and simplifying it and down to the pictures, and so they can now look at the qualitative. They don't need to understand what is Monte Carlo modeling, but they can just look at the number, they can look at the graph and pictures, and yes, into a lot of people it still might look as a very qualitative type of display or visualization. But why we doing this
Yeah.
behind and why we want to share this knowledge is
Yes.
because no, it's not just like a red, yellow, green, as simple as that. There's computationals, there's algorithm, there's experience added to interpreting the control data, and to try to prioritize it for the organization based on their objective. And that objective, it changes from company to company. So why we sharing the Unity risk indicator in open source communities? Look, we just going to share with you as simple, like I said, is UI, just the front end interface.
Yeah.
But yes, there is the back end, there's the contextual correlations, there's the integrations that goes into it.
Mm.
But we cannot translate all of that and jumping into back into the graphs and dollar amounts. The company has to start the communication using the Unity to open up the communication internally,
Yeah.
and be open about, okay, can we extract this type of control data and utilizing the unity risk indications to project the financial potential financial losses.
Yeah,
If they cannot do that, then okay, then we got to look for partnering with university, local colleges, so we can broaden our discussions. And again, from the executive point of view, it should be very simple. But once you open up the curtain, yes, it's just like I love to use car and you also healthcare as an
mm,
analogy, right? Anybody
yes,
can go buy a car kit in United States and build their own car. They
yes,
could do that, but is it going to be approved to be driving on the road? I don't think that you want to put your family into that kind of car, right? Especially when you're young kids.
yeah,
Same similar with the healthcare. It's like people say, okay, I'm going to call an ambulance. I need to go to the ER room, but there is a built-in processes and how they vetting each case and to evaluate which patients are more important, more likelihood have a life impact situation. All of that you don't see it from a layman's. It's like, but there's a lot of thought process, there's a lot of information, there's a lot of data goes behind the scene. And
sure,
again, one part of it is why we're advocating to work with university or college or institutes that they're willing to share this type of contextual correlation data so we can continue to improve the modeling, not for ourselves, but more for the general communication so they can measure against each other in based on the demographic. And those demographic, I always keep saying, I
sure.
like the three things. It's like the geographic
Hmm.
area, the type of industry,
Hmm.
and the size of the organization. And those are the things, those are the three things so we can
Yeah,
at
absolutely,
least have a
absolutely.
gauge. Okay, if I'm going to spend $1, and thank you, Mustafa, you're sharing the quantification. I have a potential loss of $200. Okay, what does that $200 means to me, to my organization? Well, if I'm going to compare to a Fortune 1000, that's it's minimal.
Yeah,
It's
absolutely.
nothing to them. But that $200 might be a big impact to some smaller organization. So that is the way that, well, that's what our intent and our objective, and try to leveraging these type of community resource and to basically paint the picture. What is it related to me with that financial dollar amount? And what is
Sure,
that behind the scene that I can measure against so I can get a better perspective to talk to my team and then talk to the outside vendors and then going into the collaborations with different parties.
sure. Yeah,
So
absolutely. So,
this control
I think
data
exact
that
as you
brings up,
say,
yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
you need to communicate risks in a dollar term, and every firm has a different appetite to lose. So a small firm doesn't want to lose more than let's say 200 per day, let's say. But a bigger firm is for them 200 a day is nothing. So it definitely needs to link to a firm size.
Yeah,
Yes,
and
I
this
mean,
is the
but
the chart also, in your presentation is talking about the insignificant, less than $10,000, right? Or, in that perspective.
yes,
And this is the part that, again, going back in communications and collaborations, yes, there is that when as an executive, okay, to look at the likelihood rating, right? And then you put the probability as an example in this one. And this is the part that basically the executive need to look at. Well, you know what? Okay, we got to classify it and we got to categorize it. And this basically becomes a cultural,
sure,
in the operation, in the organization, cultural changes. Now, people in the IT side that actually, oh, okay, I'm not looking at going with my finger and test the wind anymore. I
yeah,
actually have a gauge.
absolutely,
What is a
absolutely,
rare, what is an unlikelihood from my boss's perspective now. So
absolutely.
and this is another white paper besides yours that we're going to share it in the coming days, is to talk about the security instant response plan, and
Yep,
which we know that we work with some client, they say, okay, yeah, I have an incident, I'm going to fix it, and that's it, and then I'm going Well, sorry, not as simple as
Yeah.
that.
So yeah, absolutely spot on. I mean, the thing is, you need to understand the size, the potential. Well, what does the risk mean? I mean, in this case, and interestingly, uh, see, the conventional risk management tells you a different story than quantitative risk management. And the reason is the conventional, the conventional risk management has all this problem of, not showing the uncertainty, collapsing the range, and it's just, it's more communication tool than a real risk management tool. But if you look at the quantitative risk management outcome using the same data, or 7 risks, cyber risks, we come up with a different priority of risk. Look, on the left-hand side, the residual risk rating tells you ransom attack is your biggest risk. But on the right-hand side, it says actually it's one of your smallest risks. In fact, it's the smallest risk in terms of VaR, like how much you could potentially lose over 1 year horizon. But your biggest risk is now farm jacking. As in your case, on the quantitative, so on the conventional risk management, the farm jacking is a smaller risk. And
Right.
in both, backdoors are small, but this is some made up data. But what you can see is that you can attach a dollar value, a loss value, to a risk like backdoors, from checking, and so on. You over 1 year horizon how much you can lose. That's your second column, VaR, value at risk, dollarized risk. Also, of course, you also can attach a so-called average dollar risk, i.e., what are you expected to lose? If I actually now if I am adding up all the numbers, the 1 million number, simple sum, is the correct, in my sort of through Monte Carlo estimation, is the correct number of my risk profile, my expected loss for this organization over 1 year horizon. I'm going to lose roughly 1 million, given all the controls in place, given all the quantitative, sort of all the preventive and detective controls in place, and all the procedures, policies, IT people, and all that in place. I'm going to lose 1 million on average. But the VaR is a bigger number. But you also say, if I simply sum all my 7 risks, I'm not going to lose. I'm going to lose up to 18 million with 99.5 confidence level, but there's still 0.5% chance I could be even losing more than 18 million. So what does correlated sum mean, by the way? Looking at a number like 18 versus 14 million means, by the way, all risks are not fully correlated, i.e., not all are going to happen at the same time. Even if they occur at the same time, the impact won't be as big as what we are thinking. So in that sense, there's a natural diversification that actually, I have different risks, not only one single risk. So that is also within Monte Carlo possible to see your correlated sum, taking account the correlation between the risks.
Yeah, and also I think that just looking at the number, and the other way to look at it is how can I put a preventive plan together, and just looking at the potential loss, what is and then go look back into the business continuity plan. Are we updated on it? And then that doesn't cost anything to the organizations, and looking at the quantifications, are we doing the right thing and looking at the control data? Are we looking at the control data to first, in the first place? Are we looking at the right dimensions and then to look at the right directions? And then leveraging the quantification and come back to look at the existing plans, look at the existing solutions. And this is the part that basically, yes, there's a lot of data, it's already inside the organization, we keep saying, but it's just how you're looking at it. Or are you even looking at it at all for the measure and monitoring suggested by, again, on the NIST publications? This is the part that we try to correlate it into the 3 groups of stakeholders, how the business executive looking at things, how the governors looking at the controls and the GRC perspective correlated with the business executives, and then also their counterpart, the technologists, and how those spending correlated into the business executive, and then among the 2 groups, the governors and the technologists, how they translating what is the context on the correlations that basically go back up to the top and measure it into the dollar amount, and then come back into this cycle, continue to have this type of dialogue communication, because it evolve, you know, when the organization changes, it evolves. When the GRC changes, it evolves. When there's new type of attacks that comes in, it evolves, this modeling. So that's why it is a continuously measure and monitoring in our perspective.
One of the things we've
Spot
talked about,
on. I
Stanley,
mean, and
is
yeah,
go ahead, Mustafa.
good. Sean, so sorry, Sean, please.
No worries. What I was going to say, Stanley, is one of the things we've seen with the data visualization is that it's important to the C-suite. As we talk about changing the narrative, how do we communicate that? And it's been with the data visualization, bringing in the Monte Carlo process to this now adds the dollar value, which is important, because what we're also seeing from the legal side is that, as you said, that plausible deniability of the C-suite and the board is evaporating. They now need legally defensible decision making relative to the organizational risk regarding cyber. And that's going to be whether it be from the SEC protecting investors for publicly traded registrants, whether it be from small companies that have shareholders that are going to sue for malfeasance and lack of oversight of the organizational controls. Uh, this brings into that whole area, starting to bring that contextual value to the spend on the budget that is so important for organizations today. One of the questions we have here is, how do you have good internal controls when the requirements are continually changing? I suspect that's requirements are changing all the time, both from the
Yeah,
business changing, the business dynamics all the time, and then also regulatory oversight. How do you assess the internal controls to make sure that they're valid and up to date with all this dynamic environment around them?
I mean, I don't think it's an easy solution to that. I mean, I think if things change, then you have to maybe monitor much more often than monthly, or then maybe you may actually look at it daily. Even or even more short periods. I mean, that's the how I would do it.
And Mustafa, you were talking about the time horizon. How flexible is the time horizon? Is it today we're going to look at what the next week looks like? Here's the what one month looks like. Here's what the next quarter looks like. Here's what 1 year looks like. And
Yeah,
does that change every
yeah,
single day? Is it possible to do that every single day?
yeah. I mean, you can say, look, what's your VaR or 1 day horizon? Yes, you can. You can look. This is so in that sense. It's in the settings. You can say, look, I want to look at my VaR, my potential loss over 1 day horizon, 5 day horizon. It's the or or even longer. So basically, it can be updated. Yes.
So Ivan asked the question, how can organizations gather the information needed to build a value at risk model? And how many
You don't
inputs
need
do you
any.
need to be able to do that on an ongoing basis?
It's here. I mean, it's very simple. Again, this we here
It's
is a
simple
cyber
to
risk
you,
we control
Mustafa.
data, but for a VaR, okay, it's very simple. Okay, let's make it okay. First of all, let's say the following: you as an organization, you don't need to reinvent and ask the users for new data. Basically, we are going to use exactly what you have. We are not going to ask any new thing, but we need to still map. I.e., you need to map, let's say backdoors. What does 3 mean in financial terms? 3 means impact between 100 and 500K. So that is an input to the impact model. I.e., again, we look at likelihood and impact. So basically, we need to map this information on the left-hand side from risk register to impact and likelihood rating you have. So basically, this is the firm's impact likelihood rating. It's existing already. On the left-hand side, cyber risk register example again is existing. So the model just takes this and maps the this impact ratings, less than 10K, between 10K and 100K, and as well as like unlikely is like 13%, possible means 37%. So basically, it actually puts this, and then it uses this data in combination with statistical models, i.e., for the impact side, we use a model called log normal model. Log normal is the most commonly used model for modeling losses. It's already a proven method, and for likelihood rating, we combine it with either Poisson or binomial model. Again, those are the oldest models ever. They are in that sense. You don't have to, in that sense, redo any new data. We just need to bring it and calibrate these two models, the likelihood models and impact models, using existing data. That's nothing new. Nothing, no change required to implement what you have.
And from our perspective, from the technical standpoint of view, I think there is open source tools out in the market space. If they haven't start collecting the fundamentals of the logs and the event from the technical side of things, and it is, it's available out there. Is nothing that it complicated. It's been around, but yes, we need to start getting those logs and events as what we refer as the metadata. And then from the metadata, then the mapping, like Mustafa is saying, that, for me is the interpretation, right? Within the
Right.
internal, how do you interpret what is priority? What is important? A red, does it really mean a red, or is it just a color of red? So these are the interpretations we need to go through,
Yeah.
as what you refer as mapping. And then from that
Yeah.
perspective, then the modeling would needs to be continuously fine-tuned, and also tie this back into the internal control questions. When the requirement changes, how do you continue to change? It will be like a trigger from, and that's why it's like a circle, that we
Yeah.
got to give it a period of time for the digestions, interpretations, mapping. And once that is done, then okay, the internal team can take over. But then again, from time to time, the executive objective might change. And so, do we review it? What do we review on a daily basis? What do we review on a weekly,
Yeah,
monthly,
sure.
quarterly,
Absolutely.
semi-annual, annual
Absolutely.
basis? And this
Absolutely.
is what, part of the security incident response playbook that we're going to be sharing as a white paper to talk about the prioritization. But it's still, this type of internal communications needs to look at it from the three groups of stakeholders. Any one of those part might change, during the course, and that is determining on the culture, the organization culture. Well, how involved the business executive or
Sure.
even the board of directors are, what internal resource that they have that can go over, and how much of the layer, and why we, putting all this into a single pane of glass, is because I work at night when Sean work early in the morning.
Uh-huh.
I can't always find him. And Mustafa, you in Germany or UK. Now we're working about globally. We're working with globalization 2.0, because now with the fragmented and fractional engagements, platform like Upwork, our workforce is everywhere. So this is the part that why looking at the single dashboard environment and able to articulate through this visualization is the starting point. And then, of course, it go through the internal communication process, approval process, and then talking to the external vendor, sharing that, dashboard to the outside party. Lots of things can do. So this is just the first of many discussions that we're gonna have with you, Mustafa, and it's
Sure.
top of the hour, and I'm not gonna go on any longer. So we will continue to chat on these discussions over time. Thank you, everyone, to join us on this live event. I know that there's a lot to take in, but until next time, please send us your comments into our LinkedIn Cyber Risk Governance group, which is cyber risk, one word, and governance. So look us up and you'll know where to find us with neswitch.net. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you, Mustafa. Thank you,
Thank you,
Sean.
Mustafa.
Bye.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Sean. Thank you, Stanley. Thank you.